Son Heung-min played 78 games of football between the 25th of May 2018 and the 13th of June 2019. He benefited from just 22 days of rest during the summer, 6 less than the minimum recommended by medical professionals, and as a Premier League player, he missed out on a winter break, for which the recommendation is 14 days of uninterrupted rest. The number of fixtures, combined with the intensity of the modern game, has led to the suggestion that the workload of players like Son is unsustainable and unsafe. One organisation making this claim is players' union fifpro, in a recent report it published entitled At the Limit. The report makes the case in various ways. The pronounced issues, though, are that firstly, in extreme cases, elite players participate in almost 80 games per year. That secondly, players feature in many of these games without 5 or more days rest and recovery beforehand, and this happens regularly throughout the season. And finally, that the increasing fragmentation of the football calendar is exacerbating those problems, as various competing interests continue to restructure the sport's global shape. Short term, this leads to players playing a larger number of games in a shorter space of time, but long term, the clustering of separate competitions and the resulting reduction of off-season recovery periods leads to continuous competition cycles in which a player may feel physically and psychologically that there is no end or beginning to any given season. But how do we know how many games is too many? After all, Son's 78-game season, of which 72% were played without 5 or more days of rest and recovery, doesn't sound hugely different to John Robinson's 70-game season for Nottingham Forest and Scotland in 1978-79. Go back even earlier to football in wartime Britain and you'll hear stories of players featuring in over 100 games per year. But the key is not in the number of games alone, but in the intensity of modern football. The increasing complexity of tactical systems has ensured the continual evolution of the sport. As athletic performances have improved, the game itself has become more fatigue-inducing. As Ken Early wrote in an article for the Irish Times, the rise of system football means that the English League today has less broken play and more periods of controlled possession. Early goes on to note that in the last 10 years, not only has the number of passes increased by 25%, but the number of tackles and interceptions has significantly reduced. The team that made the fewest tackles 10 years ago tackled more than the team that makes the most tackles today. Fewer breaks in play clearly leads to a more intense playing experience, which has both physical and psychological effects. So, for Son, 78 games is arguably a much weightier burden than a similar number of games of the football played decades earlier. Perhaps more concerning long-term is the continuous competition cycles, created as a result of competing governing bodies and the financial imperatives of the modern game. Pre-season tours are emphasised for commercial reasons, leading to higher intensity games and greater distances of travel. FIFA are not only seeking to expand the World Cup, but revamp the Club World Cup with greater financial backing. UEFA has expanded its European Championships from 16 teams to 24 and is holding the 2020 tournament finals over 12 different cities in 12 countries. The impact of these and other expansions and additions floods the calendar with fixtures, all duelling for prominence. And the problem is not at its worst in Europe. In an article for the New York Times, Rory Smith wrote regarding the burnout of South American players specifically, due to CONMEBOL's decision to hold 4 Copa Americas in 6 years to realign the tournament with the European Championships. Smith writes, between 2014 and 2020, should Chile qualify for the Qatar World Cup, it is possible that Alexis Sanchez will have had just 1 full summer break. And even that summer break, Smith notes, wasn't planned. Chile simply failed to qualify for the World Cup in 2018. Had they participated, Sanchez would have undoubtedly added to the 130 appearances he'd already made for Chile at just 30 years old. It's perhaps no surprise that his form is desperately poor at Manchester United. FIFPro's report also states that elite non-European players are travelling too much, frequently crossing time zones and not getting the recommended rest and recovery time, and 63% of players say that long-haul travel impacts their performance. For players featuring both at club and international level, the travelling time can be significant. Son flew 110,596 kilometres last season. That's nearly a third of the way to the moon, and the equivalent of taking the world's longest commercial flight just over 7 times, or 135 hours flying time, 5.5 days in the air. And the frequent crossing of time zones can also be problematic for footballers, who rarely have the time to recover from jet lag. Interrupted or inadequate sleep can lead to lower reaction time, poorer accuracy, poorer decision-making, and crucially it can increase the likelihood of injuries. A study by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine of 80 Major League Baseball players even showed that lack of sleep can reduce the length of a player's career. And whilst there are clear physical consequences to overplaying an under-recovered footballer, such as the increased risk of injuries, the psychological consequences should not be underplayed. Speaking about burnout to The Guardian in 2014, Dr. Andrew Hill, lecturer at the University of Leeds School of Biomedical Sciences, said, "There's often confusion when people talk about overtraining, too many games or fixture congestions. What they're talking about is physiological fatigue, but burnout is normally psychological exhaustion. They are correlated. For every match he plays, there's going to be a psychological expenditure associated with preparing for games and competing in games." So, how could all this be changed? Well, fifpro's report makes a few recommendations. It includes locking in season breaks, limiting back-to-back games, and considering match caps. 85% of players surveyed by fifpro are in favour of an in-season 14-day break. 64% of players said they believe they had insufficient rest between games, and the evidence suggests that a very short period of recovery between matches for players, less than 72 hours, is associated with more matches lost for their teams. So limiting the amount of games that individuals play could therefore lead to an improvement in the game. A fully rested player is more efficient and is capable of higher performances. Plus, limits on player use would inevitably lead to greater use of the team's whole squad, potentially more minutes for academy graduates and youth players, something that many supporters want to see. Either way, it might be necessary. As Jürgen Klopp said in a press conference in May 2019, "If we don't learn to deal with our players in a better way, competition-wise, we will kill the wonderful game. Without the player, the game is not a good one." As a result of the way that football is structured though, fifpro says that this problem requires a holistic solution, as no single organisation can make the necessary changes alone. The task is in convincing competing interests to holster expansion plans, and that won't be easily achieved.